Well, I'm gonna do another Stingray motor build. This is what I picked up. It's a CCR 2450. It's like a 5 horsepower 2-stroke. Got it running, and now we need to take it apart. Let's get to it. Well, there's definitely a little shaft collar bolt right there. I don't know if that's all I'd have to take off. And then gonna undo these. Gotta get the motor out of here and then figure out if I can use the brackets from this to weld onto the bike. So I'll take that apart. Alright, we get the cover off. We gotta look at the motor. We'll see if we can get this pulley off. I'll get my puller on there and see if we can pull that out. And then we'd have to get these bolts out here. If that's not possible, then try to take this whole bracket off. Looks like the whole bracket actually comes off down here. Alright, let me try that. Alright, I got this side out. I had to actually get the motor mount bolts out here because the bracket that looked like it was this one here. It's actually the whole thing. But I did get it out, so it's loose on that side, and now it's just that bolt there. But it actually looks like I got to take this bracket off right here. So I got to take that off, which will come out with the gas tank. Well, let's do that. Alright, there it is. It's bigger than I thought, but it does fit in the middle. However, the chain's in the way. I'm not really sure how people are getting away. I mean, I know the Chinese motor bolts up to here and it's much smaller. Maybe that's why, but this was clearly in the way of the chain. I was kind of hoping to keep the chain in there, so we'll have to see if there's a way to do that. Now we need to get this apart a little bit, get the chain out of the way, and kind of put the motor in there and see where it sits. Alright, so here's where we are. I got the forks off because I think I might have to put it up on my workbench and it won't fit with the forks in the way. But what I'll have to do is get some blocks of wood to let this sit, level it out, and then get the motor in here. It's definitely not fitting with the chain and sprocket, which is a bummer. But we gotta might have to actually weld a plate, a flat plate. I've done that before on these, right here to here, so there's something level for it to sit on because this is beveled. And then we just got to get the motor on here and line it up with the chain. So I'll have to get a sprocket adapter for the rear rim, and then we'll go from there. Alright, moving on. I'll try to make a template for here. That's where we got to put a plate to reinforce it. We'll make the steel plate. Cut a piece, put it in here, and weld it in. Kind of get it in between here. Lay this out on the metal, make a template, and we can get that welded in. Let's see, put the motor in there after that, try to get it centered. Alright, we got the plate out, cut out of that piece, and then I'm going to put half a hole saw mark in here to fit around the seat post framing on the bike. Alright, we cut the notch out, so now it's still a little tall. I'll have to take a little bit of material off the end there, and we can look into getting it welded in. Alright, I got the plate in there. Drilled some rosette holes we'll weld in there. Try to get as much weld in as we can there. But first we gotta kind of try to center the plate and some measurements and level it off. And then we can start welding. Alright, so quick update. Cleaned up the spots where it looks like it's gonna weld. And then I made a mark on each side, front and back, so we can center it. And then I made a mark, a line there to center it as well. And then I'll have to just use a level. I already leveled the bike, and then I can try to weld that plate in. Alright, so take a look. Leveled. Gonna hold it in place and try to tack in some areas there. And then I cut the bracket out of the framing that used to hold the motor in. And hoping to put it like right there, but I'm not sure yet because I don't know if that'll be too tall. But we'll get the first plate welded in first. Well, I got all this started welding, and when you know I ran out of welding wire because I literally just came back from Home Depot, so that's good. I'm gonna put the forks back on because what we are gonna have to do is you gotta take these brackets off because I'm gonna weld in some front brake spots. I'm going to weld in some front brake pivots to install cantilever brakes, and you got to take these off because there's brackets in the way, so you either got to get rid of the fender altogether or maybe make some different brackets to hold the fender in. So that's where I am now. I got to run and get some more welding wire. I added some welds in. That one looks better. Can never really tell because I'm not that good at it. And it's just to temporarily hold it in case I ever had to move it. I'll get the motor on there. I'm pretty limited now because I still don't have the rear sprocket or the front sprocket for the motor, but I'll just throw it in there real quick. Well, there you have it. Seems alright except the carburetor angle, which I could change the intake out, put on a different carburetor. But it really comes down to where the front clutch sits in relation to the rear sprocket, which I can't check right now. So maybe we'll move on to welding on the brake bosses and get front brakes on this. Alright, so we got the forks. Trying to find a place for the brake boss, and we're going to try to hold them in like this, get the general idea, double check alignment, and then do a couple of tack welds on there, make sure we're looking good. Alright, front brakes are basically in. The welds are not pretty. This side, after I got it dialed in, came out much better. But the long and short of it is, there you go. You know, once we get the handlebars back on, I can fine tune the spring tension on it and get these pulling straight. And I'm still got to take it off because we're going to have to clean this up. You know, maybe tape off either side, put a black paint rim around it. That's about it. Let's see what this tire looks like. It's got a little wobble. I'll probably have to get that straightened out too. So those are the updates. That's basically all I can do because I'm still waiting on the clutch. Once I get the clutch, I can put the motor in. And I brought the rear tire to a bike shop down the street, Butchers, and they did an unbelievable job of straightening that thing out. So I'll probably bring the front tire too. Until the next video. Alright, we got the brakes temporarily in, and they are working. Just got to make some fine adjustments, but they are equally spaced apart. So I'll leave them like that. I'll make a note of where they're sitting on the pins, because I didn't weld these in perfectly in the same spot. So this pin is on the one at the top. Let's see where this one I think is in the middle. Yeah, that one's in the middle pin. That's just where they are with their spring tension. And then when you're looking at your brakes, if they're ever just slightly off a little bit, you adjust them with this screw here, because that fine tunes the spring tension on these. But these are looking pretty good. All right, I'm going to take them all apart now because we want to eventually clean this up and maybe paint it. All right, well, the clutch is in. But I don't have a key for it. There's a little bit of play on it too, but it is a 1-inch, which is weird. But either way, I gotta find a key for it. But what we got to do though is drill a hole in the crank and tap it out for a bolt to hold that on. So let's look into doing that. Alright, that's as far as I got drilling before the battery died. So I got to charge the battery. So let's get the front tire on, and maybe just get the brakes all set up, and then I can take them off to paint them. Paint the forks. I moved over to making the cutout for the exhaust. So you can see I cut out a rough piece. I'm going to drill the holes out, and then we'll fine tune it on like the belt sander. And we also got to get a hole saw for the middle. And there's the hole drilled out. I just got to clean the edges up and make it look just like a factory adapter. Well, after much grinding, there you have it. And so when I get the motor in the actual bike, we'll bolt that up, and then that way we can start lighting up the exhaust. But it's obviously a little ways to go. That's the latest. All right, I got this intake kit in. Doesn't quite fit. It's a little bigger, so I'm gonna see if I can elongate the bolt holes to fit in that pattern. Alright, I got the carburetor on. I had to notch out the boot because the bolts were getting in the way. I had to file those down and get them real tight because they're supposed to fit actually in that groove. In the original bolts that came with this little manifold kit are the wrong size thread. So hopefully these clamps are strong enough. I might actually get stronger clamps, but there's the carburetor on there. And then we'll hopefully get the adapter for the sprocket for the rear so we can actually put the motor on and line it up. That's it for now. Alright, here's where we're at. The key came in for the centrifugal clutch, but it's a little tall, so when I put it on the crankshaft the clutch won't fit in there, so stuck it in here. I'm going to try to file it down. Alright, I ground the key down and now the should fit. There we go. It is on there. Now I just need to wait for the clutch. I mean the sprocket for the rear end. And then I also ordered a jack shaft because I think that'll help with the gear ratio. So that's what we'll work on next. Get the motor lined up with the mounts and line it up with the rear sprocket. Till then. Alright, a bunch of stuff came in. We got the sprocket, clam adapter, and the jack shaft. I'm just threw it on there just to see. I think it's going to work there, so let me get to figuring out how I'm going to keep that in there lined up, and then we'll try to get the motor in there too and start mocking stuff up. Now we're going to move on to the rim because I don't have any bolts big enough to put the jack shaft in right yet. So I'm going to put these in. Two-piece setup. And you can see it sits in here like this. And then the other side sits on the other side. And you bolt it in. And then the sprocket will sit on the bracket like this. So I am going to look into doing that. What we usually do is clean the rim in there really good. And then I'll put some 3M double-sided tape actually on here. It helps stop it from spinning on the rim. And then line this up and make sure the sprocket's as straight as it can be. And then you tighten down the two bolts. So let's get to work on that. Alright, on. It was actually really tight. I put the double-sided tape on either side of the clam adjuster there, but it was really tight getting these to line up, so I actually ended up taking one of them off and left the other one on. Cranked them down real tight and finally got these to just barely line up, so that's on. So now I can put it on the bike and try to start lining up the jack shaft to the rear sprocket. Alright, here's where I am. I just tacked this in a little bit. However, I don't like the welds. I think my welder didn't get hot enough. And then I was making the bracket for the jack shaft. However, I realized I don't have bolts for it, so I'll have to go pick up some bolts. But once we get that in, we'll put the bracket right here, kind of center it. and then get an idea where the jack shaft is going to be. Be like that, and then this will sit like this, and then we'll start lining up the chains and the sprockets. I got the sprocket on. That's where we are. So I tacked those in. Motor's level, should be straight because I measured the distance from here to the corner. So once we all do all that, I'll unbolt the motor, take the motor out, and then I'll reinforce that bracket, and we'll go from there. Alright, here's the update. I leveled the bracket, tacked it there a little bit, ran a little bit of the chain from here to the clutch. It looked like I can work in this area. So now I got to take these bearings out and finish welding in this lower bracket. Now that I know everything appears like it's going to line up, I will have to take the motor out and weld in that bracket a little more. So that's where we are. Alright, here's where we're at. I got the stuff welded in. Some of the welds came out good, some of them are horrible. But it's in. It is lined up. The Googles claim that the chain would work, however it's pretty tight on the rear sprocket, so I'm not sure what to do about that yet, because the rear sprocket's supposed to be a 415 and these are like a 41, and Google lied and said it would work even though they were different. But it's pretty tight. I mean, it does go on there, but it is tight, so maybe it'll wear in. So the next step is I'm going to try and make some brackets, or put a bracket underneath these bolt holes on the motor so it has support this way. So that's what I'm going to work on next. Alright, so here's where we are. I noticed when I welded the bracket in, it was leaning back a little bit, so it wasn't level. You know, the motor was kind of pointing that way. And so I took this bracing. This is actually an extra piece I had for putting a spare tire on a trailer, but it fit in there perfectly. I welded it in down there, up on the bracket on the other side. The welds are not pretty by any means, but it doesn't appear to be moving anywhere. And so now I ordered a 415 sprocket. I gotta wait for that to come in. Then we can line up these sprockets with this, and then see if there's any outside possibility I could get the pedals on here. I have an extra one of these. I'm not sure if I could cut it and weld it on here to extend it. I'm not sure how that'll work, because don't know how I would get that perfectly straight and true. But we'll see if we can squeeze the pedals on there. If not, we'll just move on without them. And then after that, I'll have to figure out foot pegs and then the exhaust. So till next time. Alright, the updates. Finally got the new sprocket in. So now it's a 415, which will match the rear, and the new chain. So what we have to do now is I got to run a chain from here to here, get that cut and put the master link on it. Then we can take this gear, get it on here. Not sure which direction to go yet. Line it up with the clutch, and we'll get that all lined up, and then that'll be taken care of for the most part. Then we could probably work on the exhaust, and I'm still hemming and hawing about trying to get pedals on this, because over here the pedal has to come all the way out. I'm not sure, even though I have an extra one of these, I'm not sure if I cut it and somehow welded it on there, if it'd even be straight or if it'd be strong enough, but that's the plan. So let me get working on that. Alright, here's where we are. I got some chains on there, just welded on a chain guide to help that. And it's a little bit, seems to be rotating. It gets a little stuck up. I believe that's just the brakes. But this is concerning how loose this is, so I'm probably going to have to put a chain tensioner out there somewhere. Don't think I can knock another link off, but I'll take a look. So that's where we are now, and we've got room in the rear tire to adjust it, so I could make this tighter. But in the past I've seen where these do this and they come off, so we might have to put one here. And I'm also not sure why this isn't necessarily lining up perfectly when this CDH power sprocket sways up and down. It's a 415, and that's what I got. So, but that's where we are. Maybe it just needs to wear in. All right, so I'm gonna work on maybe tightening up the front chain, and then after that, maybe the exhaust. All right, here's where I left off. I don't know if you remember the exhaust before, but it had like a 90-degree bend, and it made the silencer point straight to the ground. So I cut that off, and I welded on. I know it's really bad. Some spots welded good, but then now that way here, I can kind of put the exhaust right about here, and it'll actually line up straight underneath the bike. Just got to work some angles in. I'll maybe make a bracket to hold it where I want, and then get the pipe up to it. So it'll be something like this right here. And that is where we'll go with that. And I don't see the pedals happening, so I'll take this out like I've done before, and you can put a steel tube through here. And I can't remember the size of the tube I got, but I can show you when I use it. What you do is it's slightly bigger than the inner diameter of the bottom bracket. And what you do is you cut a slot right across the tube, and that way the tube can collapse a little bit and you can hammer it in there. It gets in there nice and tight. Then when you find out where you want to have it, you can weld it in if you want, or what have you. I think I welded it in, but by putting the cut down the middle of it, it allows you to collapse it, put it in there, and then it expands a little bit and makes it nice and tight. So that is where we are. We'll do the exhaust afterwards, and I'll probably have to order another one of these and figure out a tensioner for this. That is where we are for now. All right, so a bunch of stuff came in. The tank did. And I just wanted to show you guys real quick the way these tanks are. They're very common. A lot of gas bike people use them, and you see how it's got these mounts on them. And what this does is there's a clamp, a U-bolt that goes on, and it goes up underneath the framing of regular bikes with a tube, and then it bolts onto the tank. But you can't do it on these because of the framing here. So I've seen people make brackets for them and everything, but what I do, which does work pretty good, is you just cut the welds right there. I don't know if you guys can see that too well. This weld right here on either side. Real careful, like with the grinder. And then once those welds are cut off, you can take a pair of pliers and bend each tab up straight. And then it sits right over the frame, and you can run a screw. I've used the self-tapping screws before, or you can drill a hole directly through it if you want to run a nut and bolt. So that's the best way to do that. So we'll grind these down and get these tabs to come up and get the tank mounted. Then we can do the throttle, and then I also got to start welding up the exhaust. So we'll have to make a bracket on for the exhaust to hold it onto the frame on this side. It'll go under here. Then we can line it up with the pipe. So let's get going with that. see? And you get just real careful when you're cutting, and then you just start working it back and forth with the pliers until you get it all the way around. So we will now try to fit this onto the bike. Alright, well I got the exhaust fabbed up kinda, and you can see the horrible welding job. I'm going to clean that up with the grinder just to see if I missed any spots. It's tough to see. And I went and shifted to the exhaust because the tank is on. However, this section here can't go down any further because of the fuel line. So I did take the actual adapters. I'm going to slide these in like this underneath the tank on either side, close it up, and that actually lifts the tank up a little bit. I'll get it off of the hoosie on the whatsy there, and then that way that's not like up against the head. So this is going to come up a little bit. I just got to go get some hardware for it. So the tank is on, and you saw the shitty job the welding, but I'll line that exhaust up even more, and then hopefully we can at least try and start this soon. So that is it for updates. Alright, we got an update. I've been working on the tank and the exhaust. Some of the welds came out better on that, but it still got awful. However, the exhaust is on. I'm just going to make a bracket from that bolt there probably down to the exhaust as well, so it's not just hanging all by the pipe. And I put the threaded inserts in up here. And then what I'm going to do is put the tank on like so. But then down here I'm going to make some brackets like I was showing you before in the previous video, just to lift it up a little bit, and I guess I'm going to have to weld them on there probably. So that's that. We'll get to working on that. Get that installed on there, then hook up the fuel line, and then see if it'll start. So that's where we are. All right, updates. So I ended up putting in threaded inserts in the frame up there, and then what I ended up doing down here was I just turned, where's the other bracket? Those brackets that came with the tank. I don't know where the other one went, but I turned it sideways, and it lifted it just enough where everything's clearing. And then I just put a couple small welds there, and then I put another insert there. So it's using M6 bolts. So 8mm head and a 10mm head. Looks good, and you know, that'll keep it nice and sturdy. So next thing we'll do is just hook the fuel. Oh, here's the other one. So is this bracket right here. And it's sitting in there like this. And then we'll just put the fuel line in and see if we can start her up. Alright guys, I'm going to work on getting the throttle cable in. I got it in on the carburetor side. Then I got to run it up over there to the throttle. We'll put that on and probably try to wire in the kill switch for today's video. I don't have much time to work on it today, so I'm going to try to get that done. See you in a few minutes. Alright, you can see I got the cable running through there, up over, and the throttle is on. Operating good. Now we need to do, I could do this, but I also gotta figure out a bracket. I don't know, there's a mounting bolt right here on the engine block. I don't know if I could get a bracket from there to weld onto there, or maybe from here. I just like this better because there's one on the other side, so there'd be 2 bolts, whereas this is 1, so I don't know if it would loosen up and move. So I don't know, I'll work on that next. Alright, quick update. I got the kill switch wired up, except these kill switches are backwards, which is annoying. So actually, you know, on is off, because that actually completes the circuit, which is actually just grounding the coil. I don't know why they do that. They should technically have it the other way, but that's that. So that's backwards, but it'll work. We get all that on. So yeah, now we have to just work on getting a bracket for the exhaust. Alright, working on the exhaust bracket. I'm going to bolt it here, and you can see from the white line, I'm going to bolt it onto the pull start cover and then weld it onto the exhaust right there. So that's what we're going to do. We'll clean up these, round off those tips, and grind some of the paint off here and weld it on. So that's what we're going to do now. Alright, so there you have it. Not the prettiest, but now we got the bracket on there. I think what we need to do now maybe is just throw some Loctite on all the set screws there, put some grease in it, and maybe pop it off the stand there and see if it'll start. So that's where we are. Alright, here's where we are. So I tightened up and Loctited all the set screws in here. Tighten the chain a little bit. I'm not quite sure if we're going to need to put a guide in here or not. We'll have to see. And I welded on the bracket we saw for the exhaust. And I started pounding in the axle. The foot peg axle, rather. See, it's really long. You basically take a 3/4, this is a 3/4 inch pipe, and you cut it down the middle. But you got to take a good amount out, not just the thickness of the cutting wheel. As you can see, it's binding up a little bit. But that's what gives it the resistance in it when it comes all the way through here. You bring it out to where you want to do it. And then in the past, what I've done is taken the pedal and you unbolt it from the arm and you drill a hole in it. I think it's a 1/2 inch hole. I'll show you the drill bit. Big 1/2 inch hole, and it actually will slide right on here. And then you just drill a hole through it and you bolt it on. You can have your pedals right there. So that's where we are now. We get the tank on. I don't know if I showed that in the previous video. Welded on the bracket for that and put in the inserts. I believe we talked about that. So that is where we are. Next operation will be to continue banging in the foot peg shaft, and then we'll see if it'll start up. Until next time. Alright, so here's where we are. I actually started it real quick the other day. It ran, but it ran like shit. So I'm going to have to take the carburetor apart and start trying different jets. But in the process, I realized that I don't even know how this happened, but the brake cable is too short for the rear. When the handlebars are over, it's pulling it, and it's actually pulling down here and then pulling the brakes in. So when you got a longer cable, I'm going to work on taking that out. It fishes through the frame. Well, hopefully I don't break this. Well, maybe I'm just going to leave that in there. Can you leave it in there? Probably not. The ends of the cable aren't going to fit through that, possibly. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Alright. Get the top of it out of here too. I'm gonna get this out with the tank in the way. Might have to leave the tank up on that one. Alright, new cable is in. So now you can see it has more play up there. There's a loop, and I even cut it down. It was much longer than I needed. That's the way I ordered it, so I can measure it and cut it down, and now it won't be pulling on that. So now I need to work on the carb. Alright, got the carburetor off. Here's the main jet. I can't even see the number there. Is it a 12 or is it the other number up there that's real small? I'm going with 12. So got a cheap kit from Amazon. I just got to go through them and see if there's one that fits there that's a little bigger, and then we'll put her all back together and test her out. All right. I ended up drilling out the original one because initially it didn't look like I was going to be able to get the little brass washer off of the original one, but it did end up coming off. But at that point I had already drilled it, so I'll try that first, see if it runs any better. If not, we'll try switching it out. I think it said it was a 210, and I did find a 220 in the kit, but I'm wondering if there's an in-between, so I'll have to look at those later. But let me see if I can get it to start. Yeah, it actually does run better. It doesn't bog now. Alright, so here's what I come up with a cover, and then I made that little grid there because I'm going to drill holes in there for air. And so I made these tabs. I got one down here, and basically it will sit on there like that. I might try to braze these up with aluminum rod. I don't know if that's going to work, but we'll see if that works. If not, we'll just put the, the sheet metal screws in there. But basically that's how it's going to sit. Now I just got to finish drilling the holes for the air to move through there. Okay, it's on, and it's ugly. Maybe I'll actually pull these out and rivet them. That might make it look a little cleaner, and also see if I can braze it with aluminum. But that's where it is, and then I gotta take it for a test ride soon, so that's where we are. Alright, I got this all together, but in order to clean this up and not have a sharp edge, I'm gonna put a piece of aluminum there and then use rivets. So gonna measure that up and drill some holes in it and put some rivets in. Alright, so I got the trim on there to help protect the leg from the sharp side. It makes it look better. Unfortunately, I didn't get the rivets in there straight, but overall looks good. Tried to run it and it ran like complete shit with the air cleaner on. It ran a teeny bit better without the air cleaner on. So I'm going to go with it's too rich, so I'm going to have to maybe drop the needle in the in the slide, and if that doesn't work, I'm going to have to try to find a smaller jet. So that is the update. All right, I welded on the pegs. As you can imagine, not pretty, but they're holding. So those are on, and I did try running it with the clip up one position to drop the needle down, and that did not work out too well. It did run a little better, but it was still really bad, so I'm gonna have to get a jet kit for it. And that's what we'll do next. Alright, so here's the update. I got a jet kit for the carburetor, and it won't work. Even though it says Mikuni on it, I'm assuming that it's a knockoff, and I got jets for a Mikuni, and they don't fit. They're not long enough. So I tried filling the original one back in with solder and redrilling it. I just can't get it to run right. It runs like shit. So I made an intake, and I had to put like JB Weld around it because my welds are bad and it was leaking, but now at least with the JB Weld it seals up the little leak areas. So I gotta get this on with the carburetor and then figure out a spring return and all that. So that is where I am right now. Alright, so I got the carburetor in. I made this little bracket for the return spring. This is the spring that comes with it. It might not be strong enough, not sure yet, but now I gotta figure out a bracket for the throttle cable to come up around here somewhere. So I'll have to make a bracket like that and then get it into the little hole on the throttle and see what she does. Hopefully it'll run right this time, but that's where we are. Alright, here's where we are. I bent up this used to be the bracket that actually went in the middle of the intake that held the spring for the governor. What I did, this believe it or not, is from an exhaust side push rod on a Briggs Stratton engine. It's steel. So I just cut the ball off on one end, cut it to length, and then I drilled one side about halfway in because the original inner diameter was too small for the cable, which was perfect because then I just drilled it, and then now when you slide the cable in there, it hits the point where I stopped drilling, so it holds it perfectly. So that'll be there. Now we just need to get one of these I made up. This was a small one. I had to drill the hole out to fit the cable, but the nice part is it fit the cable without having to cut the nub off in case for some odd reason we needed to go back to a slide carburetor. So this one will slide on first only because the pole on the cable is longer than this. So if we were to rely on this plastic piece to be the stop and someone's holding the throttle wide open, it's going to break this right off. So we'll set the depth of the cable with this one here, and then I drilled out another one, and that's where we are now. I got to figure out a way to attach it there so the cable can go on there, and then we'll have throttle. The only other thing we got to watch out for is this strong enough for handling pulling, or is it eventually going to bend? If it's going to bend over time, I'll have to reinforce it. So that's where we are. We're almost there. Alright, so here are the updates. I finished the little spool for the throttle cable, and you can see the lock on it. So when you open the throttle, it stops the cable right there so it doesn't pull the throttle too hard. That works fine. And I put another spring on there to make it a little tighter, and ended up installing this little nipple right here was for the primer, which I don't think it needs to be primed. It started the first time the other day without even having that on, but figured I'd put it in there so this isn't exposed. I didn't have to find a block for it. So that's on there, the throttle's on there. Everything is pretty much ready to go. I just gotta take it for a ride and see how it does. I might have to trim the choke back a little bit since it's hitting the frame, but other than that, that's where we are. Next update will be how it rides. So you saw in the last video, running pretty good now with the factory on there, but what it was doing is it was just taking a long time to get up to speed, so I'm going to have to try to change the driven sprocket out. This is a 14. I'm going to have to try to find like an 18 or a 20, and that should help with the gearing. Otherwise, I'd have to get a rear sprocket, and I don't think I could find a bigger one. I could actually do that too, see if I could find like a 60 tooth, but that's where we are. I'm going to take it apart now so I can do all the paint stuff.